This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
Hello, this is Kathy King from For Flux Sake, and Matt, Rose, and I want to send our love and support out to all the artists, potters, sculptors, and craftspeople impacted by Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina. Though this event occurred weeks ago, there are so many individuals still struggling to rebuild. If you are in a position to do so, please consider donating to the Craft Emergency Relief Fund. You can go to surfplus.org to learn more. Thank you. Hello, my name is Kathy King, and welcome to the For Flux Sake podcast. I'm coming to you from the Harvard Ceramics program in our fair city, Allston, Massachusetts. I'm here with Rose and Matt Katz of the world-famous Ceramic Materials Workshop, and they are ready to answer your burning questions about clay and glaze. Well, hello, Matt and Rose.
Hey, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
How are you doing? What's going on? Tell me everything.
Well, my ankle hurts this morning.
Really? Why?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my hip's bothering me.
Training for
the
the
must
marathons?
be the cold weather.
Yes,
Yeah.
the super marathon. No, everything's good. How are you holding up?
Yeah, I am totally fine. We're kind of limping through formulating the rest of our glazes after substitutions at Harvard Ceramics, and we're getting closer. We're still trying to crack the eerie blue, floating blue, whatever you want to call that blue.
There's always like one or two that
that refuse.
They're
they
awful.
refuse.
Yeah.
And then it's just an endless line of people coming to my office demanding spodumene glaze back.
Oh, you keep it in your office now?
Yeah. I wish I had some. I would just dole it out.
One of the schools I teach at just sent an email. It's like, no more lithium carb. Nobody gets it. You're not in school.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it's funny. It's like I went around last semester to the classes and I explained that this is happening. And I think I need to do it again because they heard it, but they're not really hearing it. And and then also, I mean, I'm just focusing on getting them to work, and I'm trying not to look at my glazy recipe where it calculates how much each bucket actually costs now.
There goes the budget.
Yeah, what 5-gallon bucket, what used to be $40 is, now, over $100. So it's I haven't even tackle that yet, but we were talking about maybe trying to calcine our own materials rather than buying them. What do you think about that?
I think that that's perfectly fine. I think that there are definitely materials that benefit from calcining. I think that the major thing is that you just have to be careful about what you're doing, because there's a couple of pitfalls with calcining that can cause problems that you don't expect. So for calcining, for those of you who don't know the term, that's when you take a material and you fire it up to a relatively low temperature, and that can have some benefits for working properties.
It's like 015 or something like that.
Generally around 015, so pretty low. And that's actually an important detail, and we'll touch base on that. But some of the materials that are calcined in your life, if you ever use light rutile is calcined
or rutile.
It's rutile, Rose.
Sorry, sidetrack.
Let's call
and then the Brits are going to get involved, and they're going to be all aluminiuming up in here, and I don't even want to keep it to yourself. But yeah, that light rutile is calcined rutile, and it just purifies it, so you get more material per gram. There are some materials that benefit. Talking about the Europeans, I think in the show before we mentioned colmanite. Colmanite is a material that's known to spit, literally like glaze flicks off, and calcining will usually solve that. And the big one is calcined kaolin. A lot of glaze recipes will call for calcined kaolin, and that's a commercial product. And at least here in the States, it may have a different name elsewhere, but it's called Glomax. And calcined kaolin is a big benefit because calcined kaolin is the material that makes clay bodies. And it has this property that it acts like little magnets. And so one particle sticks to another with an electrostatic charge. And so when they stick together, that's great. It's why you can throw and sculpt clay and it holds its shape. But in glazes, we also use kaolin, and kaolin is great because it keeps our glazes suspended. It keeps them from hard panning, but it also has a problem that if you have a lot of kaolin in your glaze recipe for chemical reasons, it'll make it super thick. And so calcined kaolin, gummy, yeah, like custard. And so calcined kaolin is great because it gives you all the chemistry, but by firing it up to a low temperature, we lose the physical properties, so it doesn't make it thick anymore. You can't throw with calcined kaolin. Don't try to add calcined kaolin to your clay body. It's literally useless. So it's that. And so calcining is super easy, but the details to watch out for. Rose, first of all, said one of the most important ones. Oftentimes people are like, oh, well, I'm going to calcine by throwing it, by putting some material in my bisque firing.
No.
No. Bisque is too hot. Rose said cone 015, and that's accurate. The reason why you don't want to go to bisque temperatures is as you fire materials hotter, they'll go through a process called sintering. And sintering is like essentially gluing the microscopic particles together. That's why bisque holds together. You sintered your bisqueware and the particles are physically stuck together, although they haven't gone through any chemical change. Well, those particles can stick together, and that's going to change their mesh size and how they mix and how they disperse and all that. So that's a little bit too hot. 015 is really about as hot as you need to go because everything that's going to quote unquote burn out is going to burn out. And so that's about what you need. So I yes, it's more convenient to do it in your bisque firing, but it's not a great idea.
Do different materials have different temperatures that you would want to calcine them at, or is it kind of across the board 015?
That's a great question. It theoretically, ideally, yes, every material has a specific temperature at which to calcine it to, but 015 is generally sort of the safe temperature. When we talk about what burns out, quote unquote, which is a really big misnomer, I really actually hate that term. It's not burning out; it's chemical decomposition. Like kaolin has chemically bound water as part of its chemistry that chemically decomposes at a certain temperature, about 450 C, which is not even a cone. It's so low, it actually just detaches itself and goes away. So it's not burning out anything; it's just going through a chemical process. Usually, by cone 015, everything that's going to be detached is going to detach, and so that's generally pretty safe. But yeah, like theoretically each material does, you only have to fire this one to 700 C and this one has to go to 900, but usually 850 or cone 015 will do it. The other things to watch out for, you want to do it in a bowl. Don't just dump it on the shelf. That'll be a mess. Do it in a bisque.
Contain it is a good idea.
Yeah, good luck getting it out. Do it in a bisque bowl, not a glazed bowl. Yeah, glazed bowls can go through stress of thermal expansion, so it's not really any benefit. So do it in a bisque bowl. Also, only fill it halfway because some of the materials can expand, and I've seen plenty of bowls shatter if they're overfilled as the material expands because it'll just create pressure, and then again, you're back at having to vacuum out your kiln. I will say, be careful what you calcine. I don't want to pick on anybody, but I came across a post on social media not too long ago where a person was calcining eggshells as an attempt to make more environmentally friendly form of calcium for their glazes.
Oh.
Okay.
So they were trying to make whiting or calcium carbonate?
Well, I don't know if they knew what they were trying to make. They knew they needed calcium for their glazes, and that's true. Like
Yeah.
most glazes are going to use calcium in them. The problem is whiting is are eggshells that source of calcium? They absolutely are. That part is not wrong. The problem is we use calcium carbonate as the primary calcium source in our glazes. We call it whiting here in the States. There's some different names out there. We call it whiting. And whiting is calcium carbonate. The problem is, are eggshells made of calcium carbonate? Yeah. Could you grind up your eggshells and use them as whiting? You absolutely could. The problem is, not to be gross, there's a bunch of biological things in there. There's
Yeah.
membranes and residues and
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff that you don't want. So, the person's trying to do a couple of things. They're trying to clean out all that stuff. They're trying to make the material in a form that's going to be easier to make into a powder. We need to make things into powders because it's all about getting one particle of one material next to another particle of a different material on a microscopic scale. So yeah, calcining it would make it smaller or easier to grind. The big problem is that calcium carbonate, that carbonate is not by chance. That's really, really specific because calcium carbonate is not water soluble, which means it doesn't dissolve in water. The problem is when you fire calcium carbonate over about 550 degrees Celsius, it converts into calcium oxide.
So you make quicklime.
Yeah. Which is bad. It's not good.
I mean, not great. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You got calcium, but
Unless you have a body to get rid of. Yep.
Not that any of us have ever had to do that.
no.
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 So yeah, the whiting, that carbon dioxide keeps the calcium from being chemically active. It is inert in water, which is how we need it. And in our firing, it does go from calcium carbonate to calcium oxide. That part is true, but it never interacts with water during that process. The water's gone by then. And if you fire it up to, what this person was doing, you're just making soluble calcium oxide, which, as Rose said, it's quicklime. And it will give you
Yay.
chemical burn, you guys. Like, it's bad. So, like, I appreciate the attempt to be more environmentally conscious and, to try to do things in an interesting way. But there's a reason why we do the things that we do. We often get this all the time of like people see us doing things at CMW and they're like, well, why would you do it that way? There's, it's been done this, we do it this way. And the answer is like, you guys, we've been doing this for a long time and there's a reason why things are done the way that they are. And you might not understand that reasoning, but there's a reason. If we all we'd be better off using calcium oxide, we'd use it, but we don't. And so, yeah, don't.
Yeah. I like keeping my skin on my hands. I mean,
Yeah.
it's always a good idea.
Mhm. Mhm.
So watch out what you're calcining, everybody, and be careful.
Yeah, it's funny. This is the season where we have an anthropology course. It's like 100 students in this class, and they'll come to the studio over the course of 2 days, and they go through different rotations. Like they, hand build with a Pueblo potter, Wilma Tosa. They do terracige. They make a clay body from scratch with me, and we talk about what they're looking at in class, which is being able to see what additives or aggregates would have been added to clay in the sherds that they're looking at. And so eggshells is always one that the professors ask for. And so I asked somebody to help me with this years ago, and they were like, oh, I've been saving my eggshells for so long. It's great. I'm going to bring it in. But they just brought them in, like they didn't like burn, I now, put them on baking sheets and I put it on a low heat. So like all that organic stuff will go away and it makes it a little bit more brittle and I can mash it all up. But I'm like, oh God, that was a rough smelling seminar that day. Anyway.
And that's not a bad idea. Oven temperatures are okay, like regular oven temperatures, because you'll burn most of that stuff out. Your house is going to smell like burning egg
It does.
residue.
Yeah, it's not fun.
A little
It's not good.
sulfury,
Yeah,
you know.
just a little sulfur. Not bad.
But don't fire them up. It's not the benefit you think it is.
Put the eggshells down, people. All right, so we've got questions to get to, my friends. Questions. And
Woo-hoo.
I know, right? Our first question, I don't know where Jan is from, but Jan called in about a question around deflocculation.
Hello, Kathy, Matt, and Rose. This is Jan in Accokeek, Maryland. I'm calling because despite listening to many, many, many of your wonderful podcasts, I still am not crystal clear about flocculation and deflocculation. Let me give an example. Let's say I mix up a batch of glaze one evening and come in the next day and it feels a little thick. This says to me, I didn't add enough water, most likely. Can I not just add water, or do I need to deflocculate it? Or, let's say I come in the next morning and there's a layer of water on top. Can I not just skim off that water, or do I need to flocculate? Herein lies my question and my lack of understanding. Please help enlighten me. Thank you.
Awesome question, Jan from Maryland.
I would love to help clarify. It's a great question because it's something we all deal with every day. So straight up definitions, right? The classic ceramics teacher definitions for flocculation and deflocculation is you've got your herd of sheep. Of course, everybody's got their herd of sheep, right? All you city dwellers, you're familiar.
And there's a wolf. There's a wolf coming, isn't there? I've heard this
Maybe.
one.
I have to say, we live across the street from a sheep farm. We're out in the woods, and there's a sheep farm, and we also live near a campsite that brings in a lot of people from the city. And man, the owners of the sheep farm should be getting Instagram royalties for all the pictures of the sheep the city people take. The majestic sheep. But the sheep are a good example as far as just understanding the basic definition, because if you flocculate your flock, you bring them together. And if you disperse your flock, you send them apart. So it's a bit of the flocculation term, unfortunately, even as I use it, is where things get a little bit confusing, because the real terms are coagulation and dispersant. Okay, when you coagulate something, you bring it closer together, and when you disperse something, you send it farther apart. And that's what the flocculation and deflocculation are. So when you flocculate something, you're bringing it close together. You're coagulating. When you disperse it, you're sending it farther apart. So our glaze materials are all bouncing off of each other, right? So when we suspend them in water, they're all in sort of one big mass, and the water sort of interacts between them. So the way our particles interact with water is going to depend on some of the physical properties of the raw materials we're dealing with. We're talking about calcining and kaolin, and how that is going to make the clay not have its physical properties, right? And that it's going to have just the chemical properties of kaolin, and that helps the glaze be less thick, right? So that becomes a big, big benefit. But there are a bunch of variables that we have to be aware of. And Jan's phrasing of the question is exactly right, because the number one thing that you have to be aware of is that it changes depending on a few things. One, the raw materials, yes, but two, how much water you have, and three, time. So those are a huge, huge deal. And the first one to note is that everyone who mixes and tests glaze tests tends to do it wrong. And Kathy's talked about this before with the glazes at the studio, of when you mix your glaze with water, you should mix it with a minimal amount of water and then let it sit for 3 days. Now, I know nobody's got the time to do that.
It's the 3 longest days of your life. It really is.
I know.
It is. Like,
But
come on.
It is the right thing to do, because the chemistry of how those particles interact can change over time, because there are some slightly soluble materials in our glazes, which will affect the surface chemistry, which will affect how the particles move. So Jan's not wrong. Sometimes you come back and the next day and the glaze is super thick or super thin. Well, guess what? If you go and adjust it right away, 3 days later, it might have thinned out if you just let it sit naturally. That's super common. Like zinc-based glazes will be super thick when you mix them up. And then you wait 3 days and they're perfectly fine. There's nothing, you didn't need to do anything at all. So there's that knee-jerk reaction of like, I gotta fix it. It's not right. It's the next day. But like, give it time is the first thing. But so say you wait your 3 days. The way I recommend making it is you make your glaze. We always make our glazes with 60% water. So if you're doing a 100-gram glaze batch, it's 60 grams of water. And we'll make it, and then we'll let it sit for 3 days. Then after 3 days, we will come back and go, okay, is this glaze thick or thin? Usually 60%, it's not going to be thin. Could happen, but it's usually okay for a minimum. But if the glaze is still too thick, my next thing is to add water. Okay. Now, most people have sort of a knee-jerk reaction about how much water they're supposed to be adding to their glazes. But the thing to understand is there's no correct amount of water for a glaze. The correct amount of water for that glaze is how much water that glaze needs. I have glazes that need 150% water. And I was just saying my baseline is 60, but it just depends on what that glaze is, how it works, and how I want to work with it, which is
and what materials are in it.
And then what materials are in it. Absolutely. And so there is that thing. But so that's the practical answer. Then let's say you wait your 3 days and everything is still screwy. Okay, so flocculation and deflocculation. We have two chemicals that we can add to our glazes to either deflocculate them or to flocculate them. Deflocculation, to disperse everything, to push all the particles farther apart so it's not as gloopy, tends to come with what we call dispersants. Who would have seen that coming if we're dispersing them? The most common one here in the States is Darvan. For the rest of the world, that's a product called Dispex. And the cheaper version is sodium silicate, right? A lot of people might have sodium silicate. Those are all doing the same thing. They push all the particles farther apart, and so they don't have as much physical interaction, and so the glaze becomes thinner. It's not becoming thinner, actually. It's a viscosity change, but that's another conversation for another time. So that's what our dispersants do. If the glaze is too thick and you have waited and you have, and adjusted your water content, you want to add a dispersant to thick it out. Dispersants can also help with application. If you have a glaze that tends to be very, like if you look in the glaze and there's a ton of bubbles under the surface, a little bit of Darvan, a little bit of dispersant will help to give you a better glaze application so those bubbles don't form. Because those bubbles all form from particle packing, which is literally how the particles pack together, and there's space in between them, and that space gets melted around and forms bubbles. So then the other side is a flocculant, which is the term sort of makes my skin crawl, but a coagulant, right? Something that draws all the particles together.
I'd rather flocculant than coagulant.
I like the term coagulant.
Okay.
It sounds so
you can have it. You can have it. Keep going.
That will tend to make a glaze thicker, right? Again, it's really a viscosity issue. What that is, the material that we use for that is almost always Epsom salts. Now that said, Epsom salts, first thing to note,
use it in solution, please.
Right. Don't try to add dry Epsom salts powder to your glaze. That is not an effective way to use it. You need to keep an Epsom salt solution around the studio, and you should just have one sitting around. They're super easy to make. Get, a soup container, yogurt, or whatever, you mix together 100 grams of water and 110 grams of Epsom salts, and then scale it up however big you need, and leave that sitting around your studio. A couple of drops of that into your glaze will make it thicken. Okay, so it'll change
and
that.
Just viscosity. A few drops.
Not much. Don't go
not
pouring.
Not much at all.
Yeah. Eyedropper. You need an eyedropper or a barrel pipette. Don't go going and putting in like a quarter cup. Like that's bad.
A little dab will do you. Yeah.
if you add some cottage cheese, you can add a quarter cup.
So that is going to be our coagulant. There are technically any salt, like you can use calcium chloride, that'll do it. But the Epsom salts, and that's just the plain old Epsom salts from the pharmacy you use to soak your feet, that'll do it. But again, that's really in case you're having problems one way or another, is using that Epsom salt or the Darvan. But I always age and water content first. Can't stress that enough. But it does take patience, which, you know, we all suffer from failures of patience, or at least I do. So.
Especially you.
Yeah. I can't wait for the cookies to cool.
What about when Jan talked about, like, if she comes in and the glaze has, you know, settled out and the clear water on the top, do I take that out?
I mean, there's a reason why you added the water in the first place. You don't want to take it out again.
Try mixing it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Give it a mix first, and if it applies the way you like it and fires the way you like it, then you should keep that water.
Yeah, I am not a fan of, you know, the technical term is decanting the water. As Rose said it exactly right, it was there for a reason. Now, it might be a sign that you're making that batch with too much water, right? And that maybe you should have waited the 3 days and not put the extra, you know, water in there. If it's just water and then it's the glaze is still suspended underneath, that's okay. If the glaze is hard panning, where like literally get the rock at the bottom of the bucket, that is a suspension problem as well. That usually happens from glazes that don't have enough kaolin, and that becomes a big challenge.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, Matt, because our next question, and turns out Maryland is a very inquisitive state. Lindsay from Baltimore called in with a question on just that.
Hi, Rose, Matt, and Kathy. I have a question about hard panning. So I teach at a small studio, and I also help mix their glazes, but the studio doesn't have any space for any sort of chemical area. So we buy dry commercial glazes and mix those up. For the most part, it works really well, but every once in a while you get one that hard pans like crazy. So I went to the manufacturer's website, checked the SDS sheet, making sure there's clay in the glaze, because that's something, I don't know, I read you're supposed to do. And then I decided to go with an Epsom salt solution. So I would add it, you know, little by little, week by week, and it worked. But I'm wondering, is that the best course of action? Should I be using bentonite? You know, what should I be looking for in a recipe that would cause hard panning? If I go with an Epsom salt solution, is there a general rule of thumb? Like, how concentrated should it be? How much to add per gallon? Everything I read is just so all over the place. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Okay, thanks guys so much. Your podcast is fantastic. Bye.
Well, we've had a terrible time with hard panning in our studio because but we're adjusting, and as we've had to do substitutions and kind of take the glazes back to a base recipe. And over time, our studio recipes had included, like, put X amount of Epsom salts in the glaze. And it's like, oh, having to start over. We just, like, you know, had to just see how it, you know, acted first before we just start throwing stuff in willy-nilly, you know. But
yeah,
what a great question.
That's the harder thing, is that being really reactive, and especially just assuming that the first way things behave is the way it's going to be in the long term. And that's just not true, that they totally change over time. But Lindsay, yes, it is a great question. And she checked off a lot of the boxes to mention. Number one for hard panning is you hope that a glaze has got enough clay in it. Clay, like I was mentioning, clay has this physical property that makes it sculptable, but it also is the thing that keeps our glaze material suspended, because all of our glaze materials are teeny tiny little rocks. And no matter how badly we want them to, rocks don't float. Doesn't matter if they're really small rocks. Not gonna
I'm sure
float.
there's a joke in there. I just can't think of it.
As a young girl, she had only one dream, that rocks would float.
Make rocks float. So the cool thing about kaolin is kaolin makes our raw materials non-Newtonian, which means they don't follow the traditional laws of physics. It keeps them suspended. And I won't get into all of the behavior of how it does it, but it is the kaolin that inherently does that. That is the huge benefit. That said, there are glazes out there that don't have kaolin or enough kaolin to keep things suspended. And that's for chemical reasons, because the kaolin, yes, it has these physical properties, but kaolin contains silica and alumina, and those are base glass formers. And if you put too much of something, you're going to kill the chemistry. So like this effect or that effect will go away because you have that particular additive. And so it will be a problem. The next thing would be, if you don't have the kaolin, you want bentonite. And that's pretty standard practice. If you have a glaze that has got less than 10% kaolin in the recipe, you should be adding 2% bentonite to that recipe.
Really, that much?
2%.
I know, but like the 10%, I mean, that seems pretty
ideal.
high.
5 to 10% glazes can stay suspended and it'll be okay.
Yeah.
Under 5%, it gets real rough. But yeah, in general, like if you see a glaze recipe and it's got 7% EPK in the recipe, I would probably go and add in 2% bentonite just as a default, just to make sure it's going to stay suspended. Because if it doesn't have kaolin, it is much more likely to hard pan, or if it has too little. So, and 2% bentonite, it's pretty innocuous. It really doesn't matter. As long as you have that bentonite in there, it should stay suspended. Now, you really don't want more than 2% bentonite. 3% okay, 4% it's going to start to turn gloopy again, so that's bad. So just watch out for that. But the benefit of bentonite is that it's a clay. It's a type of clay. It's called a montmorillonite. So it's made of silica and alumina. But because we're only using 2%, it doesn't add enough to change the chemistry of anything. So it's not like that big of a deal.
And if you've already had a glaze that's hard panned, you should add it in a liquid solution.
Once again,
not powder.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. So
if you're adding bentonite.
Yes. Do not try to add bentonite to just a glaze, So now we come back to the real problem of what Lindsay was saying. That it's a commercial glaze.
I know.
You can't really know what's in there.
You can't know what's in there. That said, she did say she was getting it as dry. And so
That's good.
Yes, because if you weigh out the dry batch before you mix it with water, or if they're giving you an accurate weight, you could do the math and just add 2% bentonite to that dry batch. To the dry batch, it's okay.
Well, and you should be waiting the 3 days too, even for commercial glaze, to see if it changes.
Yeah, because let's be clear, everybody. Commercial glazes, right? No matter how much they save us, and we don't have a problem with commercial glazes as such. It is literally just made up of the same stuff that you're buying at the ceramic supply store. They're selling you something that's mixed, that's consistent, that applies well, and that comes in a bottle.
Yeah, and it saves you step.
Absolutely. But the stuff in the glazes is no different than what we're making ourselves. They don't have some special chemistry thing.
But I'm just shocked that they wouldn't have like the bentonite in there already. It's like you would think I like to imagine, the factory where they make them as rainbows and unicorns work there, and, that they test the hell out of this stuff,
That would be nice.
Okay.
Well, I would hope they had like instructions on how to
mix it,
work with this. Yeah, how to mix this commercial glaze. So if you add too much water, you could hard pan your glaze if you're not following their directions. But I guess I've never dealt with commercial dry glazes, so I'm not sure.
Here's the problem. Like a lot of commercial glazes, are more effecty. Okay, that they're selling them because they have something cool in the glazes that happens.
Well, yeah, if they were just selling white, who would buy it? I mean, come on.
Well, no, they do, and they've got some clears and some colors, and that's all well and good. But let's be clear: all the glazes that do all the sort of crazy streaks and crystals, the chemistry that gets you to those effects. So the streaks are what we call phase separation. If you're trying to get phase separation from a chemistry perspective, you need to have a very low alumina level. Well, alumina in our glazes is coming in the kaolin. So if you have to keep the alumina down to get the effect, then you're not going to have the kaolin there to keep it suspended. And now all of a sudden you get a glaze that's going to hard pan or something like that. So it really becomes that question of, should the glaze company be adding in bentonite? Maybe they are. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe they are.
I mean, I'd love for the glaze companies to tell us what they're actually doing. Open up, sunshine is
That
the
would
best
be
disinfectant.
great.
But we don't know. Are they shirking that responsibility? I can't say. Are they hoping to sell you their glaze suspender, which I know a lot of glaze companies sell? The bottle of, it's usually Epsom salts, everybody. They're selling you a bottle of Epsom salt solution that'll help to keep it suspended.
It's
and possibly a little
CMC.
CMC in the.
Yeah.
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 I love it.
Yeah, it solves problems.
It does.
I'm
And,
not ashamed.
it's convenient. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
convenient.
exactly.
It's always,
What?
but it's.
What?
What?
It's just the question of, yeah, you said hopefully that they've tested and put it through its paces and all that. I mean, I'll tell this. I don't care. So we do these live episodes at NCECA, and you can go back and listen. But a couple of years ago, we were doing a live episode in NCECA, and I knew some people who work for commercial glaze companies. Were in the audience, and I was giving them the benefit of the doubt, and I was saying, yeah, of course, glaze companies do this and they do that for their quality control. And I literally look at this person who I know in the audience, and they're just shaking their head. No, we don't do
Really?
that."
Oh, really? Wow.
100% happened. Looked me dead in the eye.
I missed
And
that.
gave me the shake off. Yeah, no, I was quiet about it. And I won't name the company, but do we hope that they're doing the best that they can? Absolutely. I don't think they're trying to sell anybody
Right.
short. But are they, dotting every T and crossing every I? Maybe not.
Well, my goodness. Let's hope anyway. So y'all, this was a super science-y episode. I just wanted
It
to
was.
tell you both that you just shot the science-meter way high. But my brain, she hurts now. So that is all the time we have for today. I need to go lay down. And until next time,
Think
Matt and
about some
Rose.
Epsom salts.
Exactly. Gonna go clutch my gum suspender and
Go soak your feet. Go soak your feet.
All right. See you later, y'all.
See you, Kathy.
Later, Kathy.
Well, folks, that's it for this week's episode of For Flux Sake. I'd like to thank the listeners who submitted questions this week. And if you want your question answered on the show, shoot us an email at ForFluxSakePodcast@gmail.com. So join us next time. And when in your studio, remember what Rose always says.
Always remember to test, test, test. This is a test of the emergency glaze system.